The grand oak doors of St. Augustine's Cathedral burst open with a force that silences 200 guests mid-breath. A child stands in the doorway, barefoot, his clothes torn and dirt-streaked, clutching a bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. The baby inside wails, a piercing cry that echoes against the vaulted ceiling. Every head turns. The string quartet stops playing. The officiant's hands freeze mid-gesture above the open Bible. And at the altar, the bride in her ivory gown goes rigid, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. The boy, no more than 9 years old, walks down the aisle with the deliberate steps of someone who has traveled too far to turn back now. His eyes are fixed on the groom. When he reaches the front, he speaks. Just 5 words, but they shatter everything. "She died calling your name." The bride's scream cuts through the silence like breaking glass. The baby's cries grow louder. And in that moment, a secret kept buried for nearly a decade rises from the grave and demands to be seen. Who was this child? Where had he come from on this perfect Saturday afternoon in May? And whose baby was crying in his arms? The groom, standing frozen at the altar, looked like a man staring at his own ghost. The bride, her face drained of all color, couldn't stop shaking. Guests whispered urgently to one another, phones already being pulled from pockets, cameras trying to capture what felt like the collapse of something beautiful. But this wasn't a random interruption. This wasn't a prank or a mistake. This boy had walked 7 miles through the rain the night before. He had slept under a highway overpass. He had nursed a newborn baby with a bottle he'd stolen from a convenience store, all to get to this church, to this moment, to this man who had promised his mother he would come back. The man who never did. Before we go any further into this story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the weight of promises, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 10 years earlier, in a small coastal town in Northern California, there lived a woman named Isabel Moreno. She was 23 years old, worked 2 jobs to support herself, and had the kind of quiet beauty that didn't demand attention but somehow always earned it. Isabel cleaned houses during the day and waitressed at a diner on weekends. She lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat, and every night before bed, she read poetry by the yellow glow of a thrift store lamp. She didn't have much, but she had dreams. Dreams of going back to school. Dreams of becoming a teacher. Dreams of a life bigger than the one she was living. Then she met Garrett Ashford. Garrett was 28, charming in that effortless way some men are, and he wore expensive watches even though he claimed to be just passing through town. He said he was in California to help his uncle with a real estate deal, that he'd be gone in a few months. But when he looked at Isabel, it was like he saw something in her that no one else ever had. They started meeting at the diner after her shifts. He'd order coffee he never drank and talk to her about books, about travel, about all the places they could go together someday. Isabel knew better than to fall for a man like Garrett. A man who smiled too easily and never talked about his past. But loneliness has a way of making you ignore the warnings your heart tries to send. They fell in love, or something that looked enough like it. For 6 months, Garrett stayed. He moved into Isabel's tiny apartment. He talked about the future like it was something they were building together. And when Isabel found out she was pregnant, Garrett held her face in his hands and promised her he wasn't going anywhere. He promised her he would be there. For her. For the baby. For all of it. But men like Garrett don't keep promises. They make them in moments of convenience and abandon them when reality gets too heavy. 2 weeks before Isabel's due date, Garrett disappeared. No note. No explanation. Just an empty closet and a phone number that no longer worked. Isabel gave birth to a boy she named Ethan. She held him in the hospital alone, tears streaming down her face, whispering apologies to a baby who didn't understand why his father wasn't there. She raised Ethan by herself. Every diaper change, every sleepless night, every first word and first step, she did it all without help. And she told herself she was enough. That Ethan didn't need a father who didn't want him. But late at night, when Ethan was asleep and the apartment was silent, Isabel would look at photos of Garrett on her phone and wonder what she had done wrong. Why hadn't she been worth staying for? 9 years passed. Ethan grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books and asked questions about everything. He wanted to know why the sky changed colors at sunset, why some people had more than others, and why he didn't have a dad like the other kids at school. Isabel answered every question except the last one. She told him his father had to leave, that it was complicated, that he was loved and that was all that mattered. Ethan stopped asking after a while. But Isabel knew he still wondered. She saw it in the way he watched other fathers at the park, pushing their kids on swings, teaching them to ride bikes. Then one morning in late April, Isabel woke up feeling wrong. A dull ache in her abdomen that wouldn't go away. She ignored it for days, thinking it was stress or exhaustion. But the pain got worse. When she finally went to the emergency room, the doctors found a mass. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. The diagnosis came with statistics she didn't want to hear and treatment plans that sounded like wars being waged inside her body. Isabel tried to fight it. She went through chemotherapy. She lost her hair, her energy, her ability to work. Ethan watched his mother fade, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal round of treatment, Isabel sat Ethan down and told him the truth about his father. She told him Garrett's full name. She told him about the promises he had made and broken. And she told Ethan that she had found Garrett. That after years of searching, she had finally tracked him down. He was living in Sacramento. He was wealthy now, successful, and according to his social media, he was engaged to be married. Isabel showed Ethan a photo. Garrett Ashford, older but still handsome, standing beside a woman named Vanessa Hale. Vanessa was beautiful in that polished, practiced way. She wore designer clothes and smiled in every photo like her life was something carefully curated for public consumption. Their wedding was scheduled for May 18th at St. Augustine's Cathedral. A destination wedding. Extravagant. 300 guests. Isabel looked at her son and said something she would never have said if she weren't dying. She said, "If something happens to me, Ethan, I want you to find him. I want you to tell him what he missed, what he threw away. I want him to know that we existed, that you exist." Ethan, 9 years old and terrified of losing the only parent he had ever known, promised her he would. Isabel's condition worsened rapidly. The cancer spread faster than the doctors had anticipated. By early May, she was too weak to leave the hospital. Ethan stayed by her bedside every day after school. He read to her from her favorite books. He held her hand and tried to be brave even though inside, he was falling apart. Then on May 10th, 8 days before Garrett's wedding, Isabel gave birth. No one had known she was pregnant. Not even Isabel. The doctors said it was rare but not impossible. A cryptic pregnancy, hidden by the symptoms of the cancer ravaging her body. She delivered a baby girl, premature and fragile, weighing barely 4 pounds. Isabel held her daughter for 3 hours. She named her Grace. She whispered to her and sang to her and kissed her tiny forehead. And then, as the sun set outside the hospital window, Isabel Moreno took her last breath. Ethan was holding his mother's hand when she died. He felt the exact moment she left. The nurses tried to comfort him, but he couldn't hear them. All he could hear was his mother's voice, asking him to find Garrett, to tell him the truth. Ethan was placed in temporary foster care while social services tried to locate any living relatives. But Ethan had already made his decision. He knew where Garrett was. He knew when the wedding was happening. And he knew he had to get there. 3 days after his mother's funeral, Ethan ran away from his foster home. He took baby Grace with him. She was still in the hospital, but Ethan waited until the night shift nurse stepped away, and then he took her. He wrapped her in a hospital blanket, grabbed a bag of formula and bottles, and walked out into the night. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to keep moving. Sacramento was over 100 miles away. Ethan walked through the night, following the highway, hiding when cars passed. Grace cried often, and every time she did, Ethan stopped and fed her, his hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. He slept in a drainage pipe under an overpass. He used the last of his money to buy diapers at a gas station. A truck driver gave him a ride for 30 miles before dropping him off at a rest stop. Ethan didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just kept walking. On the morning of May 18th, Ethan reached Sacramento. He was filthy, exhausted, and scared. But he found St. Augustine's Cathedral. He waited outside, watching the guests arrive in their expensive cars, their designer dresses, their laughter floating through the air like they didn't have a care in the world. And when the ceremony started, when he heard the music begin inside, Ethan picked up baby Grace, took a deep breath, and pushed open the cathedral doors. The moment Ethan walked down that aisle, carrying Grace in his arms, time seemed to stop. Every eye in the cathedral was on him. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Who is that child? Why does he have a baby? Is this some kind of protest? But Ethan didn't look at the guests. He looked only at Garrett. Garrett Ashford stood at the altar, his face frozen in shock and confusion. He didn't recognize the boy at first. How could he? He had left before Ethan was born. He had never seen his son's face. But something in Ethan's eyes must have struck him, because Garrett took a step back, his hand reaching for the altar rail to steady himself. Vanessa, the bride, looked between Ethan and Garrett, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and shaking. Ethan stopped a few feet from the altar. Grace was crying in his arms, her tiny fists waving. He looked up at Garrett and said, "My name is Ethan Moreno. I'm 9 years old. And you're my father." The cathedral erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people stood to see better. Garrett's best man grabbed his shoulder, asking what was going on. Vanessa stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. But Ethan wasn't finished. He held up baby Grace, her tiny face red from crying, and said, "This is your daughter. Her name is Grace. Our mother died 8 days ago. She died calling your name." That's when Vanessa screamed. A raw, guttural sound that echoed through the cathedral. She turned to Garrett, her face twisted with betrayal and rage. "You told me you didn't have children. You told me there was no one else." Garrett tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Ethan, at Grace, at the life he had tried to bury, and for the first time in 10 years, he saw the consequences of his choices standing right in front of him. Ethan's voice was steady, even as tears rolled down his cheeks. "She loved you. She waited for you. She thought you'd come back. But you never did. And now she's gone. And we have no one." He placed Grace gently on the steps leading up to the altar. "She's yours," Ethan said. "I can't take care of her. I don't have anywhere to go. But she's your daughter. You don't get to pretend she doesn't exist." And then, before anyone could stop him, Ethan turned and ran back down the aisle, disappearing through the cathedral doors and into the street beyond. The wedding never happened. Vanessa Hale walked out of the cathedral without looking back. Guests scattered in chaos, some filming on their phones, others demanding answers. Garrett stood alone at the altar, staring down at baby Grace, who had finally stopped crying and was looking up at him with wide, dark eyes. Eyes that looked just like Isabel's. Someone called the police. Someone else called Child Protective Services. But before anyone could take Grace away, Garrett picked her up. For the first time in his life, he held his daughter. She was so small, so fragile. And in that moment, Garrett Ashford, a man who had spent his entire adult life running from responsibility, felt something break open inside him. He thought about Isabel. About the promises he had made and broken. About the woman who had loved him and died alone. And he thought about Ethan, a 9-year-old boy who had walked over 100 miles, carrying a newborn baby, just to make sure his sister wasn't forgotten. Garrett left the cathedral and spent the next week searching for Ethan. He hired private investigators. He contacted every shelter, every hospital, every school in the area. Finally, he found him. Ethan was staying at a group home for displaced children. When Garrett walked into the room, Ethan didn't run. He just sat there, his arms crossed, his face hard. Garrett sat down across from him. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain himself. He just said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry for not being there. I'm sorry for everything." Ethan stared at him. "Sorry doesn't bring her back." "No," Garrett said. "It doesn't." They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Garrett said, "I can't change the past. But I can be here now. For you. For Grace. If you'll let me." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had carried his baby sister through the rain, through the cold, through everything. Then he said, "She made me promise to find you, to tell you the truth. I kept my promise." "You did," Garrett said. "You're braver than I ever was." Over the next few months, Garrett began the long, painful process of becoming the father he should have been from the start. He gained custody of both Ethan and Grace. He sold his expensive condo and bought a house with a yard where kids could play. He enrolled Ethan in a good school and went to every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every moment he had missed. It wasn't easy. Ethan didn't trust him. There were arguments, slammed doors, nights where Ethan cried for his mother and Garrett didn't know how to help. But slowly, painfully, they began to build something that looked like a family. Garrett kept a photo of Isabel on the mantel. He told Ethan and Grace stories about her. He made sure they knew their mother was loved, that she mattered, that she would never be forgotten. So what do we take from a story like this? What lesson can be drawn from a 9-year-old boy who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and refused to let his family be erased? Maybe it's this. The truth always finds a way. You can run from your past. You can bury your mistakes. You can build a new life on top of old lies. But eventually, the truth will come knocking. And when it does, it won't be polite. It will demand to be seen. Garrett Ashford thought he could leave Isabel and pretend she never existed. He thought he could start over, fresh and clean, with no consequences. But consequences don't disappear just because you ignore them. They grow. They wait. And sometimes, they show up at your wedding, carried in the arms of a child who loved his mother enough to walk 100 miles in her name. Isabel Moreno deserved better. She deserved a partner who stayed. A father for her children. A love that didn't vanish when things got hard. But in the end, maybe she got something more important. She got a son who honored her memory. Who fought for his sister. Who refused to let the world forget that Isabel existed. That she mattered. That her love was real. Ethan is 12 years old now. He still misses his mother every single day. But he's learning to trust Garrett. Learning that family isn't just about biology. It's about showing up. It's about keeping promises. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Grace is 3. She'll never remember her mother. But she'll grow up knowing Isabel's name. Knowing her story. Knowing that she was loved before she even took her first breath. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. To be remembered. To be loved. To leave something behind that matters. So let me ask you, if you were Vanessa, the bride who watched her perfect wedding collapse, would you have stayed? Would you have tried to forgive? Or would you have walked away, just like she did? And if you were Garrett, given a second chance you didn't deserve, would you have taken it? Would you have fought to become the father you should have been? Or would you have run again? These are the questions that define us. The choices we make when faced with our own failures. The moments when we decide whether to be brave or to be comfortable. Ethan made his choice. He chose love. He chose his sister. He chose to honor his mother, even when it cost him everything. What choice would you make? If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that the smallest among us can carry the greatest courage, then share it. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's shocking, but because it's true. And truth, no matter how painful, is always worth telling, always worth hearing, always worth remembering. And don't forget to subscribe. See you on the next story.